Sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. Humans are very likely to adapt to their environment very quickly. But in today's video, I want to talk about things I discovered here in Sweden, which are not that usual. And these 5 things might surprise you as well a little bit if you don't live in Sweden. Maybe Swedes who are watching this video as well know all of them, at least one of them. If you do know these things, which I'm going to mention in this video, let me know in the comments down below. But it would be cool if maybe something is amongst those 5 things a Swede didn't know. So I'm originally from Germany, but before I moved to Sweden, I lived 10 years in London, the UK, and now I have been living here almost 2 years in Sweden. So just to let you know where I'm coming from, that sometimes it takes a little bit of time to discover things. And actually, the list was a little bit longer than 5 things, but I thought I make this video quite short. And if you like this video, I will reveal the other things in another video. Without further ado, let's get started with the surprises here in Sweden. So the first thing I want to talk about is that you can get a free taxi in certain circumstances. So that sounds maybe a little bit odd, but it's something I haven't heard before and slowly discovered here whilst living here in Sweden. So what do I mean with that? So the main part I want to talk about where you can get a free taxi is actually around the educational system. For example, when your child wants to go to a school and the school is not in walking distance, or it's too much hassle for the parents to drive them, or let's say that's exactly why the taxi is there, so the parents don't have to drive them to school, you are eligible for a free taxi. And that means actually every day on the way to school and also back. There are certain requirements, and I put here a little screenshot which I got from one municipality. So that means also it depends on where you live. In Sweden, each municipality has their rules, and based on that, you can get a free taxi for your child or not. Why I'm mentioning this, I feel it is quite surprising. I don't think it's available in any other countries. Of course, I don't know the rules of all the other countries. So if you do have that as well in your country, let me know in the comments down below. We definitely don't have that in Germany, as far as I know, and as well as in the UK. It doesn't exist. You know, it's government money, which obviously goes towards that support. It just shows again that Sweden really cares about children, and then especially about their educational system. No one should suffer, you know, everyone should have the same opportunities. So if you live further out, I mean, that definitely applies a lot in the countryside, but even here where I live in Haninge, which, you know, there's a good public transport. So normally you could get, you know, where you need to go to. But even here, I see that there are taxis around here which are picking up children or teenagers because they go to a certain school. It's not only applicable for, you know, the far countryside somewhere in Sweden. Of course, there's also other things like when you have a disability. I saw cars, taxis for that as well, which are arranged. If you have any requirements in that area, there's definitely support here in the municipalities. And one thing regarding taxis or free taxis I wanted to tell you as well is that you actually can get a free taxi as well when you give birth here in Sweden. To be honest, this is something I didn't really know about. You know, when you have to go to the hospital and you don't have a car, you can actually claim the money back. At least that's what I read. I didn't do it. I was just like, you know, too much distracted with having a baby. But it is possible, and if you can, you probably should make use of it. So the next thing I want to talk about is related to work. So when you are an employee at a company here in Sweden and you have passed your 6 months probation time, anytime from then, you can actually take off 6 months to start your own business. Yes, I find that so fascinating that this is actually a law. That means your employer has to give you those 6 months if you want them. So what does it mean? So basically, you can tell your employer you want to take off 6 months, and that means you have unpaid leave. But after those 6 months, you get your job back and can just continue. I think that's just an amazing idea, you know, that just shows that Sweden knows what people want, you know. I think everyone has sometimes this little itch of like, I have this idea, I really want to work on it, but obviously I have a full-time job, I don't have the time for it. And entrepreneurship is so much supported here, which I think is really, really great. Of course, whoever worked on a startup idea or started an own business knows how hard it is. And I think the majority of people who take these 6 months don't succeed. But I don't think that's necessarily negative. It's just something to give you the opportunity to try something you really, really want to. Maybe you're not made for like an own business. Of course, 6 months is not that long to actually succeed and make a lot of money, or maybe the equivalent to your day job. But I think just to have this opportunity is such a unique idea. And I think it's amazing that you have this opportunity here in Sweden. The same applies to when you actually study. You are allowed to take off 6 months to interrupt your studies, to start your own business and try your ideas. And you can then just come back and continue studying. So that's also possible. I made a video about a university here in Stockholm and interviewed 2 students, and they actually did exactly that, taking off some time to work on their startup idea, which, by the way, is news in English. I leave the link down in the description just in case you want to sign up to News in Sweden, but in English. Let me know if you knew about that, and let me know if you work here in Sweden already, if you've ever tried taking off those 6 months and working on your startup idea. I would be very curious to know. Okay, the third thing I want to talk about is also related to having your own business. It's something called, quite difficult to say in Swedish, but I'll try. It's called uppbyggnadsskede. I hope I said that right. It's such a hard word. So basically it means construction phase. So when you start a business here in Sweden, everyone knows it takes a little bit of time until you get your business up and running. So the government decided it takes up to 36 months to probably build your company properly and to have the income you would have maybe when you work a full-time job in a company. Very simplified. For example, when I moved here to Sweden, I was still working for my current employer, but to make it legal, I started my business so I can invoice them here from Sweden to England. But why I'm actually mentioning this is I got pregnant, and then there was this discussion of what kind of parental leave am I eligible for. So normally, if you come from the EU and you have worked in the EU, your former job still counts as like you have worked in the EU, and then based on your salary, you would get parental leave paid out. But because I worked in the UK, it didn't really count. So I couldn't really use this as, you know, I have worked and therefore I get some money. But because I started my own business, I was treated like this is the amount I will get paid after 3 years, or within those 3 years I started the business. I started my business as a insights analyst, like a data analyst. So then you could look at what you normally earn as a data analyst in Sweden. And then they took this salary and kind of gave it to me. And based on that, I was paid parental leave. I think it's a very interesting concept, something I would not expect. Something, again, which has a lot of faith into people as well. They really trust you that you're going to make that money, and then from that money you will pay taxes, right? That's what it is all about. But you haven't started, so you kind of get the money in advance. Again, something I haven't really seen in other countries, maybe in other Nordic countries that exist as well, of course. Normally, they can be quite similar in their systems. But yeah, this also only exists since 2018 here in Sweden. So it's not that long ago that this was introduced. And I was very lucky to benefit from it. Yeah, I just wanted to mention it because you never know if you're maybe in the same situation or you're looking for some solutions. Then this is something you could look up and see if it applies to you as well. Okay, another thing I want to talk about. These are actually all the good things Sweden provides to specific circumstances, to specific life events. So here in Sweden, you can actually vabbing, which basically means vard av barn. That means you can take off a day of sick leave for your child. If you're parents, you know how stressful it can be when your child gets sick and when they start nursery and just be in nursery regularly, you know that this can happen more often than not. And then you have to take off time of work, and that could be quite a problem. But here it is actually the law that the employer has to give you the time to look after your child when your child is sick. They have to let you go, but they don't have to pay you, which is maybe quite common. But then the government steps in and actually pays you VAB money, which means it's like sick leave money. You get paid to look after your child, so you don't lose out a lot and, and have to stress about not being able to earn anything whilst you look after your sick child. I remember a time when my daughter actually broke her arm at nursery in the UK in London. And of course, I had to go to emergency the next day and couldn't work, had to look after her, make sure she's okay, find out what happened, etc. And I told my employer and they said, well, either I have to work these hours or I take off that time as unpaid leave, which I found very shocking. I mean, it was the first time I encountered that, so it just intuitively felt wrong and mean. I don't know. It kind of makes sense. Yeah, you don't work, you don't get paid. But, that's why there is this welfare system here in Sweden thinking about all these things, which can be quite stressful sometimes. So here in Sweden, the pay is slightly less than 80% of what you normally get. But there's also a cap that you can't earn more than 1,175 SEK per day if you have to VAB for your child. And then there's also the possibility to actually have 50% you look after your child and the other 50% you can work, depending on, maybe your kid is sleeping and you actually can work a little bit. So it's very flexible as well, again, based on your own circumstances. So what do you think about VAB? Do you have that in your country? Is that something you would like to have? Then maybe you should move to Sweden. The last thing I want to talk about is actually homeschooling here in Sweden. This is nothing I actually was considering to do with my children, but I know that especially a lot of Americans like homeschooling and do that in their country. But in Sweden, it's actually illegal to homeschool. So kids go normally from 7 years old until 6 years old to school, or that's at least the minimum time they go to school. So that is considered the years where there should be an education in school. And yeah, homeschooling is not very traditional here compared maybe to the US. And the authorities really want children to be in school, obviously because of the education, but also of the social life. And only in very, very rare circumstances, there can be homeschooling at home, but you have to apply for that and it can be denied depending on your reasons. But if you just have the feeling you want to homeschool your children, that's definitely not possible here in Sweden. I'm personally not a fan of homeschooling. I cannot imagine spending so much time at home with my children and homeschool them. But I do understand why people are doing it. I wasn't a fan of the German school system when I went to school. It was very old school. It was very, only those very old school subjects like biology and physics and mathematics, which you obviously still have in school, which is absolutely fine. But I think schools also adapted to the real life. There's things like media or the languages and stuff like that. So I think these days you can actually do more things at school than just those very traditional subjects. But yeah, I could not see myself homeschooling the children. I don't even have the knowledge, and I'm a social person, and I think my children are quite social. So it would be also difficult to really build like a social system for them, making friends. You had to put that on top of homeschooling and make sure you go out and find these places where they can make friends. Anyways, that's just me on homeschooling, but I found it very interesting that it's actually illegal here in Sweden. So I thought it was super interesting when I discovered these things in the last 2 years. But do let me know if there were any surprises for you, or if you knew all of these things which exist here in Sweden. I would be very curious to know what you thought about everything. Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you in my next video. Have a great day and stay safe. Hej då!